Hello, everybody. Really humbled to moderate this panel, and thanks for all to the Nebular Summit team for the organization. So we have a very easy and difficult panel. Lot of things to say about the Terra Luna meltdown. So you are all more or less, or were more or less close to the Terra Luna ecosystem, at least with IBC, which is the consensus. So what were your thoughts before the meltdown, and what are they after?
Me, I've been skeptical about the algorithm of Luna. I ran a fund. We never buy Luna or UST to make yield, because I think the mechanism is kind of flawed if you don't have an intrinsic value on the token that it burn to make some stablecoin. Because when you have the death loop, you have nothing to save the death loop. And if you have another usage, the Terra was having a lot of usage, but all the usage was kind of related to UST. And there was no diversity of usage on the Terra layer 1. And I think that it is very important for an algorithmic stablecoin, in my opinion. If you keep the same programmatic and algorithmic logical to have some value on the tokens that you burn, because if you don't have that value, you will have a worthless minting when you really lost the peg. And if you have some other usage, for example, if you were on Ethereum and you have many usage, or on Atom and you have other usage, it will be different, I think. And so it's difficult to imagine that a protocol like that could sustain a long-term vision, and that the protocol could have a market cap of stablecoin that is higher than the market cap of.
Gonna give a hot take, which is I feel like Terra. So when Terra first came, and you look at their white paper when they first came and talked to us at Cosmos, they had this idea that can you build, if you build up enough demand for a stablecoin, real economic demand for a stablecoin, can that itself maintain the system? And the system that the mechanism they used was without real. The question was, the hypothesis was, can you use demand to build that system? And what it was, Terra is actually the closest thing we've seen to on-chain fiat currency. It uses a very similar dynamics to most fiat currencies, and I think that Anchor was the problem, right? They kind of got really greedy after a while, and they realized that hey, as the supply of UST increased, the value of Luna kept increasing, and so they got kind of greedy, gave out this 20% fake yield, and one of the problems was that the problem with the 20% fake yield is actually made it harder for people to build real use cases for UST, because we were building our lending protocol on Osmosis called Isotonic. We're not doing that anymore. We're kind of working with Mars now, but for Isotonic, we have to get deposits of UST, we had to beat the 20% yield from Anchor, which is actually makes it harder to build real use cases. And they kind of just undermined their own, the experiment that they set out to do. They kind of just undermined it by, instead of building real, natural, organic demand for UST, it was all just this fake synthetic Anchor demand. And and those people ran for the door as soon as UST started depegging. So yeah, that's kind of my I feel I wonder if in an alternate world, if this mechanism would have worked without Anchor, without them providing this fake yield.
I need to be fair with the Terra Luna, because I was quite optimistic before what happened. In my opinion, there were some misrepresentations. So basically, they claimed that Chai was running on top of UST, and that transaction fees were settled with UST, which actually was just discovered that it was fake. And that was the organic demand that made me optimistic about the fact that you had one of the major product in Korea using UST as a settlement layer, even though the value was not 100% captured, but the velocity of billions of dollars of transactions actually can create value out of that. Now we know that it was fake. And actually what drove the value is the greed of the Anchor protocol. The value has been created out of, hey, we're giving you 20% yield on stablecoin. Yeah, it was a honeypot. And basically, I think that from what Sunny was saying, I think that it could have worked if those representations were real. I think that it could have been like the real decentralized fiat currency. But basically, I think that we need to be more careful about stable coins in the world, and that today, if you talk about stablecoin, then you need to be pegged to fiat currency. So I think that you need to think twice when you use a stablecoin. Is it emitted by the actor or the institution that gives you the collateral? That's the most important point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think picking up on that from the perspective of an infrastructure operator, Chainflow is a Genesis validator for Terra, and it's also the first network we decided to stop operating on. We stopped operating on it back in 2019, I guess it was. And we did that for two reasons. One, just to say it this way, we really weren't happy with the way Doe was running the show. We didn't like that he was essentially telling validators what to do and validators were doing it. So that was the first warning sign for us. And then when the stablecoin launched, quite frankly, we just simply didn't understand it, and we didn't take the time to understand it. So based on those two things, we decided to take down our operation, and this was back in right around late 2019, right around DevCon Osaka. And so at the beginning, that was our take. I mean, there's some FOMO, I'd say, over the past, 6 to 9 months. But, ultimately now, while we sympathize with a lot of people who lost a lot of money because of this, we feel grateful that we stuck to our values. So we had some suspicions early on. I think it's easy for those suspicions to get superseded by FOMO. Fortunately, in our case, it didn't this time, but that's to be said that because we're so new in all this, and for some things I think we'll talk about later, it's easy for the other thing to happen pretty fast too.
Thanks a lot. Now it's introspection time, guys. It's easy to criticize on Twitter, but it's also good to say, what could I do better on a personal, professional level, on a community level, to avoid such things or to improve it? What are your thoughts about it?
Tokenomics auditing and tokenomics auditing and tokenomics auditing. I think we just don't look at tokenomics as a serious thing, as technical stuff. For example, we have started to see that some protocol and some logical have particular attention to the consensus layer, particular attention to few layer of execution, etc., etc. But we don't see the tokenomics as an essential layers also that should be study to be very resilient. And I think in the case of Terra is even more important to look at the tokenomics as the protocol is a tokenomics mechanism. But I really think that the main problem was not doing so much auditing on the company, people who run the company, the foundation, people who run the foundation, and maybe the protocol itself. And yeah, that's the main major problem of crypto. I think it's a problem that we all have because the space is very quick, and if you have to take decision and of investment decision, sometimes you don't have the time to make proper audits and due diligence. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna double down on this and less trust, more control, and more paranoia. Like the problem in this space is that we need to be paranoid. Like you receive a LinkedIn request from a dev that wants to work with you, like 90% chance he's from North Korea. So basically, you need to think twice when you use something in this space. You need to audit it. You need to think about the worst case scenario. like we have been. So I'm going to talk about Key. We have been like one of the, and we're still suffering from the UST collapse because we had like a $1.5 million pool in UST on Osmosis, and we're still stuck with it. So basically, we're suffering every day from external incentives being distributed to people providing liquidity on UST pool. And we have decided to rely on UST. And it was our choice. It was our mistake to say, hey, let's trust Terra, let's trust the UST. And I think that, so now we, even though I think that the Axeler team is like quite solid and they have built a great product, I'm cold feet right now when I see that it's a bridged stablecoin. And I think one of the most important things that we need to have in the Cosmos, so this is my learning, we need a real native stablecoin in the Cosmos.
We'll have native USDC on Osmosis very soon.
Oh, that's amazing. That's an alpha.
Nice announcement.
Whoa. So I think that like control paranoia is something that is really important, and in the blockchain and crypto space, everyone that builds a product needs to have that sense of like I should not trust, I should like really verify.
Yeah, I would just emphasize that. I mean, I think that's super important. I think we do trust too much, and then I think in addition to that, I think we have to look at the leaders of the projects quite a bit, and I think we have to make sure that we align with the leaders of the projects, especially when we're putting a lot of money behind them. But to your point, things are moving so fast so often, and people don't want to miss out that a lot of that diligence often gets overlooked. But I think from a scientific point of view, and most people I think in the space tend to come from an engineering background, or at least believe in the scientific process. I mean, getting to a point to make proving something isn't broken as opposed to believing it is fixed, is probably the perspective that we need to shift more to. And then finally, from a personal perspective, I think, I probably could have spoken up more loudly than I did at the time. I wrote a post recently, or not recently, I wrote a post after the fact called The Rise of the Activist Validator that talked about the experience but didn't even really name Terra. So I think from a personal perspective, I could have spoken up maybe a little bit more loudly, but I'm not sure that that message would have been heard. I think for some other reasons we can get into when we can talk about what's moving forward, but yeah, I think that's my perspective. Oh, now you can hear me. Should I go through that again? So the short version is, I think probably as an individual, speaking up louder, when we made this decision to come down from the network. And then as a community, to your point, be skeptical and, make sure that you prove to yourself that something works, as opposed to believing that something works and hoping it doesn't break.
From an Osmosis perspective, I think one thing that we should do and are moving towards is just like a revamp of how incentives work. So our incentive system right now is like very much focused on like looking at the current state of the network and reward and like, what at a very high level, what the incentive system is doing is looking at the assets that have the most volume and putting incentives towards there, because we're trying to do this sort of volume maximization, and so I feel that like is not the right long-term approach, because what you want to do in the long term is like you don't want to just look at like, hey, this is what the state of the market is today. We actually want to do is say, hey, this is where we want liquidity to go, and we should put incentives in the place where we want to accrue liquidity. So this is what we've started doing, which is like, we've moved into a world where like, hey, we're looking like, okay, look, we want more ETH liquidity, we want more USDC liquidity. Let's put incentives there and then let the liquidity aggregate. So instead of like being this very passive system where like we let, oh, okay, look, UST and Luna were high volume assets, so let's put all the incentives there. Not all, but like, half the incentives there. Instead, we should be like, more Osmosis governance needs to start being more strategic about about incentives and like thinking about where it wants to be, making sure it's well diversified and things like that. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your transparency. Some people say that government, it's not my personal opinion, but government with crypto are good at two things: doing nothing or overreacting. So is regulation a necessary good or a necessary evil on such case like the Terra meltdown?
It's always non-binary, I think. Always, all is gradient, so it's not yes or not. But my opinion, I think you know about regulation, is that it must be optional and very constructive with a lot of sandbox, not law before we know how things will work. And so, in my opinion, I think that right now, the regulations that will arrive in Europe with MiCA is pretty bad for the stablecoin environment, because it's made by people that doesn't know how stablecoin works. It's made by people that I think even don't take a look at the metric of stablecoin, because like 1 million limits of volume per day is totally crazy for the stablecoin. So the US bill, the draft right now, I think it's better. Really, regulation is a good stuff to give a framework, but it must not stop innovation. It must not forbid all the stuff. It must be privacy oriented. Right now, it's not the case of most of the regulation. So for me, yeah, regulation is more an enemy right now of crypto than a helpful friend. But yeah, maybe one day we'll have more suitable regulation and more optional logical. Because if you have an optional logical, you let people create, and you know you could still punish robbing or stuff like that, even if you don't have a regulation on banking system. Because if something you rob, you have contract with people, you have a contract that is not respect. So for me, you could have optional agreement that permit to have a stamp by authorities, but you could have some companies that run critical business without that stamp and just reputation. Because cryptocurrency is about that. It's an economy of reputation since the beginning, and I'm really attached to pseudonymous logical and to pseudonymous reputation. And I think identity, in the long run, will help us to build very resilient system without regulation and without being present as name, and to have very important people, like it's the case right now, but even more on-chain people that will be very important, and that maybe will be judged on the future jurisdiction of crypto and stuff like that. For me, we have to build this world of trust with a pseudonymous and privacy logical without the states, and make like our own regulation by code, because there will always be dispute. You could have the best smart contract you want. At the end, you will have discussion and dispute between humans, and we must have jurisdiction, and we must have people that can judge with the constitution of a project, with the law of the own project.
I'm sorry, Adli, I don't agree with you.
I know.
Yeah, because we had this discussion many times. I think that the enemy is not regulators. The enemy is the lack of education on what blockchain is and how does it provide value in the ecosystem. Let's not forget that Terra was an experiment, and all of us here knew it was an experiment, and we were ready to take the risk. The real problem, though, are those centralized actors that offered high-yield savings accounts without telling people that they were aping into UST and Anchor. This is the problem, and the regulator should have acted there. Other actors, I'm going to talk about something else, Celsius.
But you don't need regulation to do that. It was robbing at this time because they promised something.
No, because regulators actually...
If you go to see people and take their money, it's...
they provide you money. It's like it's a security. You're providing them something, and if you don't provide the information about what's happening and what are the risks, this is the lack of transparency, and regulators work on that. So, for example, when you provide a product, they ask you to have like a document that explains exactly what are the risks, and that's the problem. It's actors like Celsius that actually promised DeFi were not DeFi actors. They were centralized actors actually doing the job of a bank with fractional reserve and aping into high volatility assets and hoping that people won't get their money back because they get yield from the money that is deposited. And that's where regulation needs to act. Those actors that actually do centralized stuff, non-auditable, non-on-chain stuff. DeFi is the solution. Regulators should not regulate DeFi the old way. They should make sure that DeFi protocols actually respect auditability, trust, security. This is actually what needs to be done. And that's how regulators need to be educated. So at the end of the day, sure, the regulator could end up as an enemy, but not because they want to stop, they want to protect. That's what they want to do. And what happened in the 80s, in the 90s, it has just happened again in the last 3-4 years. People getting yields out of nowhere, and they want to get those yields, and they end up wrecked. Like, so that's the problem.
But you also have a transfer of value.
Yeah, more actually smarter people and big pockets get with even bigger pockets, and that's the problem. And this is why regulators are here. Why I was talking with Karine earlier, and we were saying, why is prop trading regulated? When a bank does prop trading and trades with its own money, it can trade against their customers. And this is what Goldman Sachs has done, and this is what many actually banks has done. And regulation is there to protect the retail from those smarter people that actually can extract value out of the people that do not inform themselves. And I think that regulation is important.
I think I have two questions, or I think it's really two questions for me. It's one, should regulation be here? And then two, who should be doing the regulation? I agree with a lot of the things you said, but I don't necessarily agree that regulation to date has been protecting retail investors. I think that's the smokescreen for what's really been going on. But moving on from that, I think to the degree that the community itself can self-regulate, that will go a long way toward then hopefully influencing how much governmental regulators need to get involved. So if the community can do a good job in educating themselves and self-regulating themselves, hopefully maybe the need for regulation by the government will be a lot lighter than it will be otherwise, because if we have Terra after Terra after Terra after Terra, then sooner or later the governments, which are very slow moving to begin with, will start to kick into gear faster. So I do think that if we're able to hold them at bay at all in order to better establish ourselves while also showing that we know what we're doing to some extent and are capable of some self-preservation, then we'll be more resilient once the governmental regulators start knocking on the door.
What do you think of the showcase that the community has shown us with the Juno whale situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's one of the problems that needs to be overcome. One of the problems that needs to be overcome is that people need to be paying attention.
Yeah, the problem is that the community actually, there is an asymmetric way of getting information, and you can manipulate a community to do something if you have enough reach towards the community. And I think that's hoping that the community can self-regulate. It's a very strong hope. I hope to, but I kind of lost the hope.
It's a matter of incentive. If you have the good incentive,
you need to take the time, and you need to read, and you need to educate, and I think that's like 10% of people do it.
Well, I mean, to that point, I think, I talk a lot about decentralization, particularly in validator sets, and a lot of times that message doesn't get heard. And what I keep hoping is that, not hoping, but in a way hoping, thinking that eventually people are going to start paying attention to these things when enough pain is felt, right? So in this case, I thought maybe Terra would be the forcing factor for people to start feeling that pain and maybe doing their own research a little bit more. I mean, once the numbers start going up again, who knows? I mean, all bets may be off, but I do think that there needs to be some intersection between the community and the regulators, because if the regulators come in and do what they're doing now, all they're going to do is buy time for the big institutions to come in and get their hooks in this, and then what are we left with? ETFs, crypto ETFs, and a 6% return?
Actually, the regulators only listen to the people that take the time to talk to them. And I think that we need to take the time to talk to regulators to provide them with the vision that we need to see executed.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that part.
Maybe to finish on a positive note and looking to the right direction. what excites you for the next step, and what outcome can you come from this meltdown to do a better contribution to the Cosmos and blockchain ecosystem, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think just picking up on where I left off, I think hopefully this can be a forcing factor for people to really understand that to the extent that we own these networks and we own these, and these communities are ours, we have to participate and we have to pay attention. And hopefully this is a forcing factor for more people to do that. And I had one other thing, but I forgot, so I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I think, in general, it was Osmosis was hit pretty heavily by the Terra collapse. We were the biggest DEX for UST, and almost close to half the liquidity on Osmosis was with UST and Luna combined. And so, we definitely took quite a hit there. And so, I think just definitely a bigger focus on diversity of assets, but also safety systems. So, we've had these ideas of volatility aware AMMs that could have helped protect our LPs. In general, I think with bridges, building safety limits into bridges, there's no reason that more than 25% of your bridges, assets should be leaving in a 1 hour period, right? If that's happening, there's probably something wrong and you need to pause your bridge or something. And so, building in these more automated safety systems into the protocol to protect LPs and users in the long term is sort of what we are spending a lot of our time thinking about. I mean, after all, if we're not doing that, what's the point of DeFi?
Yeah. There is no free lunch. Never forget. No. To be more serious, I think the good lesson of Terra and Luna was to show also the resilience of protocols of DeFi, even if economically there was some problem, clearly. It was a big demonstration, a big improvement for Cosmos to show that Cosmos SDK to show it worked very well.
$1 trillion of volume in 24 hours, managed by Tendermint and the Cosmos SDK. I think that we're all here and we can say that we have the best consensus protocol in the world because it has been stress tested.
And there was no bailout. There was no, it's always interesting to compare even trio capital stuff and etc. There is no bailout when it's unfair to bailout, but there is bailout when it's kind fair to bailout. For example, wormhole or stuff like that. And it's interesting to see how crypto start to self-regulate even financially, because when you have some platforms that get down and it's fair to save them, or people have very great interest to save them, they save them. And it's a big difference between crypto and traditional world, because the too big to fail could fail. Terra was the too big to fail that failed because it was too unfair and too unrealistic to save. But some are saved because there is interest of the biggest number to save. I think we could also talk about the proposition about Terra 2 that would save where there was a lot of arbitrage to know where goes the new airdrop and stuff. It was, I think, not so great, but if I remember the repartition. But those demonstrate how we self-regulate. It's interesting to see that crypto is more and more active, and that the community and governance of all protocol and operations start to be more and more decentralized, with a lot of people participating. 4 years ago, it was not the case. You don't have forum where people will discuss proposal during hours and hours, and many people, not just core team or some active users.
I think it's quite clear that Adli and I speak a lot because we have the same conclusion. The first thing is that, we've been stress tested, and I think I'm quite happy. Actually, it's the trade-off. We lost 1.5 million of liquidity, but at the end of the day, the Cosmos SDK was stress tested. And the second thing, and I think that is something that's quite interesting. We didn't have, I prefer a horrific end than a horror that does not end. And that's what we had since 2008 with like the crisis of the subprime. Everyone, we all paid for this. But with the Terra and the whole like meltdown and DeFi actually worked. The people that were involved got wrecked. That's it. And I think that this is the great thing to do. It's like if you take risk, you want to have big gains, then you take risk. But at the end of the day, when it hits, it hits. And it won't touch your neighbor who was not involved in the thing. And I think that's actually, yeah, well, indirect. Directly.
Few neighbor.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think that it's also proof that DeFi works on economical like level, and that's great. I'm quite hopeful for the future.
Great, guys. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but please feel free to reach out to these amazing guys. They are builders and very precious. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Maybe we have time for one more question, depending on if Zeki is here already. Zeki, are you here already? No, so we have time for one more question.
Okay, thank you first for the debate and asking important questions. I don't have a question. I just have some remarks. I think that saying, do your due deal, don't believe, is obviously true. It's true until a certain extent. First, for small projects, we know what to look at. Then when it comes to very high-end innovation, R&D, there is a time when you need to trust. And based on the market cap of the project, it seems to me a lot of very smart people were involved in the project, one way or another. So.
And a lot won also.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, very good for you. But, and some of us were in the Luna, not in the UST, surely not in the Anchor protocol, somewhere in the UST, not in the Luna, surely not on the Anchor protocol, etc., etc. So, but, the belief makes it difficult, even when you know it's linked, because we all knew it was linked, to just move away completely from it. But that's, again, just a general remark. Then so on the topic of regulation, like who should regulate, I think progressively we will move towards the way the traditional world is governed, if I may say, for an obvious reason, which is interoperability. So we all remember the day of Osmosis and how the Cosmos ecosystem suffered indirectly. So even if you were not in those projects, you suffered. And then, on that very day, I remember thinking, this is the limit of interoperability, basically. So I think the mix is probably until, when the project reaches a certain level and certain market cap, maybe there should be sort of a consortium, in banking, in insurance, or, not consortium, but, call it whatever, committee, when people look at each other, kind of, and then there's like some people who are able to raise a red flag. I mean, I heard you, Chris, saying maybe I should have been louder, or maybe, some people should say, hey, you guys, you saw that, what do you think? And then maybe saying, people, maybe not the people in this room, but, just people, be careful, because we see this and that. Then, from a regulatory point of view, I mean, I hope we'll see the SEC moving away from the, security, non-security debate, and have obviously a specific regulation, for crypto assets. I think it's going to happen soon. I mean, if we have a regulation for asset-backed securities different from stocks, then there is no reason why, there should be one for these assets, and maybe the combination of both makes it, easier for everyone, all of us, and the system.
Two quick comments on that. Regarding what we understand and what we don't understand, and the founders and not the founders. I think that gets back to my point. I mean, there are a lot of smart people in the world, and you also have to understand the values behind the people. So I think if you're making the jump between understanding something and not understanding something, maybe the way to fill that gap is by understanding the values of the people behind it. Yeah. And then on your point about raising the red flags, there's a group of validators working up there right now on this. So if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to stop in this afternoon.
Sure, and to finish on too big to fail. So it was not too big to fail. I mean, it's not too big. It's too big for the ecosystem.
Yeah,
it's
for
not
the ecosystem.
Exactly. So when you think about, the world of tomorrow, which is decentralized, hopefully, and we all want to see that, then, you just don't want to be in a Terra Luna situation anymore. Because I think we've all very lucky that it happened now, and that it doesn't happen in 5 years or 10 years. So everybody can learn the lesson from it, including the youngest people who never saw major crisis in the past. And then, act from it. And
yeah, but I prefer that there is no bailout, For example, I would have loved that American bank and world banking system just collapse during...
Well, it happened. It happened.
It didn't happen. And because there is a very cheaty guy, and the cheaty guy is the states, and give money, free money, and not directly the states. Yeah. It's a political manner to influence bankers, central bankers, that should be private and independent entities. And they give money to bankers, they give money to states like crazy. And right now they will buy bonds and bonds and bonds because states are totally in debt. And the money only goes to the wealthier right now. Because all money is debt creating. So it's a different subject, sorry.
No, it's a very good question. But coming from TradFi, there is a real question about the role of central banks. And we were talking about this. I think we're all more and more educated about central banks. I think the last generation didn't know it was working. And now we are very lucky because we understand and we can say this might be wrong.
I was just going to talk about central banks in general. I feel like Doe and I, we used to talk a lot about like how we see the future of money evolving, and we had like two very different views, or same goal, different views of how to achieve it. My general take on money in general, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see today you have those like three functions of money. You have the unit of account, medium of exchange, store of value. And I think these things are going to get like sort of taken apart. And, I guess like a couple of years ago, I got like really into like monetary policy and stuff and like just understanding it. And I'm like, I became a fiat maximalist. I think fiat is actually like the coolest thing ever. Fiat is I think fiat's like the greatest invention of the last 100 years. But like the problem is it's very like discretionary, like, letting central bankers choose what to do with it is like doesn't seem right. What we want to move towards is like algorithmic monetary policy, right? Like the fundamental basis of fiat is just this idea that like you want money is a market and you want the supply of money to react to changes in demand for money. And so fiat is a system that does that, and you want to just make that more algorithmic. And so I think Terra was an interesting approach of how to try to do that. But the approach that we're going for with my long-term vision of what the point of Osmosis is I want to see a world where every asset is money. Like you go to a store and you pay with your Apple stock, and the merchant receives shares of their favorite NFT, right? Like all assets are money, and we're gonna basically...
You missed the BrandFi keynote.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's an interesting world that we move towards, and then like the unit of account will become like this like dictionary unit of account. So if you look at like Chile, what they do is they actually have two units of account. They have like the Chilean peso and the Unidad de Fomento, which like the UF is like it's a index that the central bank puts out every day, and it's pegged to inflation, and it's not an actual asset. So you go to the store, you buy something, it's denominated in Chilean pesos, but all your long-term payments are denominated in UF. Your rent, your mortgage, your car payment, all of these are denominated in UF, and it's like I don't know, this idea of like dictionary units of account are very interesting to me, and I think like eventually like central banks are going to move into this world where like they become standards and measures institutes, where what they do is they like study the economy and then output these indices that like act as unit of accounts for people to use.
But I think it's going to be communities. I think those units of accounts are going to be generated by communities, by brands, by institutions, by and that's quite interesting because it will create, like, I think we're moving towards a world of tribes that are interconnected. And like, if you see the Cosmos ecosystem, we are kind of tribes that are interconnected through one protocol. And I completely agree with this vision, and I think that's going to be the implementation of the stakeholder capitalism.
Great conclusion. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry guys, you'll have to stay there for a little bit. Just a quick question, because you were talking about the horror that never ends, and we've seen it with Terra, kind of, because they launched Terra 2.0, which, well, it exists somewhere there and it's working, I guess. Do you think it was an honest attempt to give money back to people who lost some of it? Or was it just a way to say to regulators or to people coming after them, well, we tried, it didn't work out, but at least we tried, so we did all our best, so you cannot really attack us?
You remember that scene on The Wolf of Wall Street when he needs to resign, and at a certain point he comes to do the speech, and he says, "I'm not leaving." I think that's what's happened with Terra 2.0. But I don't know, actually. I don't know what happens in the mind of someone who actually had a $80 billion ecosystem that goes to zero in a few days. I think there is maybe a honest attempt of saving face or saving the fact. There was an ecosystem on Terra, actually. And there was some builders on Terra, great builders. But I think that it was too centralized, and I'm quite happy to see people from Mars Protocol going to build on Osmosis. I'm quite happy to see other, like Loop, I think, is going on Juno. No, it's exciting to see the Cosmos work as it was supposed to work.
Yeah, I think the only perspective I have on that is that everybody's attention span, especially in the crypto space, is really short. And I think a good way to distract people is by giving them something to do. So, if nothing else, I think it's easy to distract from what happened by looking forward. So I wonder if there's a little bit of that in Terra 2.
Yeah, I feel like I might have accidentally incepted the idea of Terra 2, where, what I was telling them was like, what they should have done, like, very early in the DPEG process was like, I don't know. I guess I saw that the system was going to zero anyways as soon as the DPEG started. And I think what they should have done was just, like, halt the chain, convert all UST, or allow all UST to be converted to Luna at the last known spot price on Astroport. And just, like, they had an ecosystem there, and they could have just, like, done that. But yeah, I actually think that they believed in, to their credit, kind of, they, like, believed in the mechanism. Like, I don't think they were, like, scamming people. I think they, like, went down with the ship, and they, like, believed it till the last minute. And so, so they wrote it all, and then they were like, oh, okay, well, wait, should we do that idea of, like, doing the, saving the ecosystem? Like, guys, it's too late now. But yeah, so I don't know. I think there was actually there was like a window of opportunity there where, like, there was something that could have been done, but, like, yeah, they didn't take it.
A big round of applause.